Welcome to Ageless. I'm your host, Amanda Lamb. This is a podcast for women, about women, featuring women. It's about what happens when we turn 50 and our culture quietly deems us irrelevant. But we are not our mothers. There's a new generation of 50-plus women who are redefining what it means to thrive in the second half of our lives. Whether you're still raising children, working, caring for aging parents, or just looking for the next chapter, I strongly believe that my guests will inspire you because they inspire me. On today's show, my guest is Nancy Popkin. Nancy has reinvented herself many times over. She's had multiple chapters, some of them inspired by her passion for a particular field, others by her need to be financially independent. Like many women, she left the workforce for a period of time while she was raising her daughters. Also, like many women, she was divorced in 2017 and needed a career that would pay the bills. She was the assistant news director at the television station where I worked. She played an integral role in hiring me and helping me shape my early career in journalism. Nancy, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Amanda.
It's great.
Thanks for having me on your podcast.
It's great to catch up with you. So you left TV news, and I have watched all of the many facets of your career evolve, a lot of that through Facebook. And it always felt like, to me, like no matter what you were doing, you always gave it your all. So let's start back in television, because that's where I first met you. You were a woman in management in local TV news in the 90s. That was definitely not the norm, especially where we were located, which was in the South. So how did you get into that position, and what was it like being in that role as a woman?
I definitely came up in TV news when it was a boys' club. And really the way to move up the ranks, both to bigger markets and to better positions, was to be willing to move around. So by the time I was 30, I had worked at 7 TV stations. At a TV station in Denver, I was the first female producer assigned to a primary newscast. I produced the 5 o'clock news. That was a big deal there.
Which is unbelievable, right? Because when you think about it today, I mean, most of the women in the newsroom where I've worked, most of the producers are women. So that's really incredible.
Right. It's crazy. And here's the funny thing. I worked with a woman who was the first woman to do a live shot in the Denver market. And that was like a big deal.
Yeah. Oh, I remember those days. I was one of the first, not the first, but in Portland, Maine, we had a satellite truck, and I was one of the first early on to do a live shot.
Yeah, it's crazy. I became a manager by working my way up, and really by being a hard worker and a quick learner. But you're right that becoming a manager of a TV newsroom in the South in the 90s was challenging. I was female, Jewish, and a Northerner. I'm not sure which of those characteristics was the most difficult.
Right, how you would triage those, right?
At the time, the most intimidating people were the male department heads, because they would have weekly department head meetings, and for whatever reason, even though I wasn't a department head, I was assistant, I had to attend those meetings. I guess because we had the biggest department and I was such a hands-on manager. So I used to go to those meetings in very high heels so I could look those male department heads straight in the eye and they couldn't look down on me.
Well, I remember you being a great role model because of your ability to be a leader and be confident as a woman. And I remember at that time, I mean, my mother was a lawyer, so I did get to see that growing up, but I hadn't seen women to that point. That was my third job. I hadn't seen women in news management. And I remember thinking, that you had to be one tough cookie to withstand that. And I mean, it sounds like that is the case.
Yeah. And it's crazy, even though that was the case, I think in a lot of ways we still did tolerate a lot of things that wouldn't be tolerated today. Like I actually interviewed for a news director position at one of the stations in Charlotte. And the general manager, and I was pregnant when I interviewed, and the general manager at the time told me that he wasn't going to hire me because I was pregnant.
That would be a lawsuit
And
today.
yes, like today, that would never happen.
No.
But no, but yeah.
But
crazy.
it sets the stage really for what it was like, back then.
Oh, totally.
And I know in '99 you left TV management and you became a talent agent. And I'm assuming that was for news people. Was that your main focus? Okay.
It was so my ex-husband and I decided we wanted to move back to the Philly area to raise our kids close to family. At the time we had just had one child, and we were really we had to do infertility treatment and all that, and I thought, well, maybe we're just going to have one. So it was important that we be close to family. So we decided we were going to relocate to Philly. And as the assistant news director at WRAL, I had done, just about all of the newsroom hiring of both talent and producers and such. And one of the top headhunters in the industry at the time, Sandra Cannell, also obviously a woman, she encouraged me to hang out a shingle representing TV news producers as well as on-air talent. So that's what I did. And I actually had a great business for 11 years until 9/11. And then the salaries dropped so much in most of my clients were in local TV news. The salaries dropped so much that I just couldn't justify taking a percentage
from their
salaries that were cut.
Yeah, that didn't make a lot of sense. And it didn't make sense for the clients to have an agent if it was going to cost them so much money.
Right.
So then
so
what happened after that? You followed
I was always interested in health.
Yeah.
And when I was at RAL, I supervised a team of health reporters. When I was in college, I was the medical reporter for my school newspaper. And I went to the University of Pittsburgh, and there were some pretty exciting things happening there. Like at the time, the first ever double lung liver transplant or something like that. So, there was a lot to cover. So, I was always interested in health and nutrition. And I decided to go back to school to become a nutrition counselor. And I kind of started that business while I was phasing out my agent business.
And so you really, at that time, were following your passion. I mean, we all have things that sometimes they're hobbies and then they turn into a career. But it sounds like this was something that was always kind of percolating for you. And then you said, okay, I'm going to try this.
And it's a funny thing because I look back on it and I think I had so much confidence at that time because, I had a successful TV news career. And then on a suggestion of one person, I started a business that was very successful business that I never had to advertise or do any marketing. And then I think I just assumed that, I'll start a nutrition counseling business and of course that will be successful.
Right. You're manifesting it and I've always done well. So of course, why not? But then life happens, right? Life happens. Yes. And that often derails our plans, best laid plans of how we're going to proceed. And you had stuff going on with your family. You had two girls. Yes. One had some health problems. One was involved in a sport, ice skating, and there was a lot of demands. And so you stepped back, right, from the workforce for a couple of years.
I did and for more than a couple of years, for 7 years. So I initially, while my oldest daughter was the one that had the health problems, it took a long time for her to get an accurate diagnosis, and she was in and out of the hospital a lot. And so it was very hard for me to continue with my nutrition clients when I was in the hospital with her often or going to this specialist or that specialist. So I stopped working, and then her situation became something that needed to be managed. And so I did that. And then, of course, by the time she was in high school, she was 13 when it all started. By the time she was in high school, she was really somewhat managing it herself and getting prepared to go to college. And I was involved in that a lot. I had to advocate for her in terms of getting some accommodations. And so I remained out of the workforce. And then when she was getting a handle on it herself, my younger daughter had been skating competitively, but not super serious. And then she decided that she was going to get more serious about it. And the geography of the Philadelphia area and the suburbs. I was driving
all over.
All over, hour and a half to University of
Sure.
Delaware a couple times a week, So, and it seemed like I was supporting, I was supporting her ambitions. And it goes back to that kind of women empowerment thing that I felt like it was important for me to support her, because when I was growing up, really, it was just boys' dreams and aspirations that were supported.
And I don't even think, and it wasn't our parents' fault, but like in the 70s, I don't think our parents were as involved. They weren't as involved as we were.
They weren't.
I mean, I had a volleyball player and a dancer, both competitive, and so a lot of out of town trips, a lot of weekends away, a lot of late nights. And I think your story is something that so many women can relate to, which is you get to a point in a family where somebody's got to do these things. And so it often comes down to who's making more money, who's putting the food on the table and the roof over your head. And let's face it, more often than not, the male spouse is making the money that is paying those bills in a more significant way. And so it falls to the mom to be doing all these other things. But you did at some point, you managed a center for fitness and nutrition. You wrote a book called Mindful Eating. So did you do that after all this, or was it?
So I guess as I was going through the divorce, I was trying to get back. I was trying to start my career again.
Sure.
Because I knew that financially I was going to need to do that. And by that time, the internet was providing so much free nutrition information that no one really wanted to hire somebody to do that. And I was working at a couple of different gyms and eventually took a full-time position managing the fitness program and the nutrition program, but it did not pay very well. Yeah. And I wrote the book, Mindful Eating. I don't believe in dieting. But I do believe in obviously eating healthy, and I think it's important. So I wrote that book, and then as I'm working in the nutrition center, and I'm, interacting with clients and what have you, I'm thinking, boy, my management skills are a lot more valuable than my nutrition knowledge. So,
and you're also thinking, I'm divorced or I'm getting divorced. I have to support myself. This is,
I had lot of anxiety.
Another thing a lot of women experience. My mother was a family lawyer, and she used to say some of the poorest women in America are divorced women. And I think what she meant by that was that, especially when you've stepped back from your career, like you said, you had to reinvent yourself pretty quickly.
Absolutely. And so, it was a scary time for me. But I realized that I had some pretty valuable skills in management, and I decided to capitalize on that and go in that direction. So I actually found my job on Craigslist.
And tell us what you're doing now. You got into construction management, which is like the polar opposite of everything you've ever done. And how did you connect with that, and how did that work?
So construction management is a really niche business. We represent owners by overseeing the people who provide the design and construction services to make sure the project they deliver is built to the agreed upon plans and specs. It's codes, best practices, all of that. on time, on budget. So
You had to learn a lot, I would imagine, to get into this business.
it's funny. So my boss was smart. He knew it was such a niche business that he couldn't advertise really for someone who had experience in the business. So instead, he advertised for a set of skill sets. And I saw the skill set and I said, that's me.
I can do this.
The previous office, so a big part of my job when I started as office manager was writing proposals to win work. And when he saw that I wrote a book, he said, you wrote a book, you can write proposals. And so I started writing proposals, and then I started recruiting people who would be willing to have me put them in the proposal. And if we won the work, they would come work for us.
That's brilliant. And you moved up in this company pretty quickly.
I did, probably within a matter of months. Hiring people was easy for me because that's a lot of what I did as an assistant news director. And writing resumes, that's what I did as an agent. And writing proposals on deadline, well, I was used to news deadlines. In fact, my boss still tells this joke about there was a power outage and our computers were down and our server was down and we had a proposal due like at 3:00 in the afternoon. And this was like at 11 o'clock in the morning, and he was all freaked out. And I was like, this is nothing.
Exactly.
Like a 4-hour deadline. We can do this.
I mean,
we ended up going.
It's like you took all the things you learned in all these other jobs and you put them together in this new role.
Exactly. And I mean, I got lucky. We had a team of people on a government contract, and the team lead needed a lot of help managing that team. So she would call me up and say, we need a training on how to deal with difficult clients. So I'd make a training and go deliver it to our whole staff of project managers in New York City. So I was, I was getting opportunity. I was seeing opportunity and I was taking it. And then it was just kind of a natural for me to be in this hybrid role of HR and marketing, or business development, if you want to call it that.
And now you're managing like 50 plus people?
Right. Yeah. So when I started with the company, we had 23 employees. So I feel like I've not single-handedly, but
helped grow it.
Certainly been an integral part of growing it. Yeah.
And when I hear your story, I mean, obviously everything that you've done, there were obstacles and challenges and it wasn't easy. There's so many women, I'm sure, who will be listening to this who are over 50. Maybe they're divorced. They're going through a divorce. They're concerned about job prospects. They look at LinkedIn or they look at Indeed and they go, there's nothing out there for me. I mean, what kind of advice would you give people in that situation about how do you do this? How do you start over? How do you, especially in a completely new field?
Right. So what I tell women all the time, look for those jobs that are being advertised that require the skills that you have. Like, don't just look at, do I have experience in this industry? Look at the skills you have and the skills required to do the job. There's all kinds of niche industries out there that we've probably never heard of or even thought about.
Overlooked. Yeah.
So just look for something that matches your skills. Also remember, your first job out of the gate doesn't have to be the one you stay in. It's a stepping stone. And the most important thing about that very first job that you take, like the job that I had at the fitness nutrition center, it builds your confidence. It builds your skills. It builds your confidence. You're getting back on the bicycle.
Exactly. Because a lot of women, I think, feel stuck, right? They feel like,
absolutely.
It's too late for me. I'm too old. I have done this thing for so long. I can't do something new. And, it feels a little bit defeating, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I think it happens to all of us at some point in our lives. We don't expect it. It's like, I never expected to be here. Wherever here is, like you lose a job, you lose a marriage, you lose a spouse, your own health takes you out of the game. or you have an ongoing battle with it. Life just happens, right? So we have a choice about how we can respond. You can be grateful. We can be grateful for what we do have. And I would always say to myself, like, this could be worse, right?
Sure.
I'm not going to be destitute. This could be worse. And then having the agency to take positive steps towards something better than here, wherever here is. And the steps can be, really small steps, but it's just taking
some steps.
Positive steps.
Yeah.
And I think gratitude and agency can get you through anything. We all have negative voices in our head, and some of us grew up believing that like there was one way for a woman to live a life, and that was to get married, have kids, raise a family with one man, live happily ever after. So, if you did something differently, you have those negative voices that said, like, I screwed this up. I failed. Or maybe your negative voices say, like, I should have studied something that would have given me a career I could go back to at the time. Like, I actually had those negative voices. Like, I should have been a teacher, or I should have been in nursing, because you can go back to those things at any time. Or, maybe your negative voice says, I should have finished college. Or tells you, any aspect of it that you got it wrong. So you have to be able to talk back to your negative voices and look around you. And when you think about it, like, are those stories you're telling yourself, are they really true? Like, plenty of successful women who got divorced and came out on the other side happier. Women who found happiness in same-sex relationships or no relationship. Women who didn't have kids and were actually happy with that decision. Like, there's all different ways to do life. And I think
we get stuck in thinking there's one way. Yeah.
Yeah, we have to stop beating ourselves up for that. And then, when fear shows up, thank it very much for trying to protect you.
And tell it to go.
And then, feel the fear and then do the thing. And when anger shows up, like, the same thing. Say, thank you, anger. I know you're trying to protect me. But, and maybe that anger gives you energy to prove all those negative voices wrong. And then I think lastly, the thing is, like, don't try to do it alone. Talk with your friends. Figure out, who your cheerleaders are. I have a friend who's a business owner, and he told me a story about a woman he hired, and he hired her because she called him up and said, I want this job. I want an interview. And he was so impressed by the fact that, like, she just showed up in person, and he figured if she had that kind of
chutzpah
chutzpah attitude, she would have it towards her work. So when I submitted my resume for the position that I ultimately got, I followed it up with a phone call saying, I want an interview.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense.
So, yeah.
So do you have
take advice from people?
I think that's a great, you have to have a tribe. I think that's a great advice. I have so many people, friends and former colleagues, and who I seek advice from all the time. And I don't know what I would do without them.
And if something doesn't resonate, just don't take it. But,
seek it. And yeah. So final question. Anything else that you haven't done that you want to do? It could be career-wise, or it could be something else. What's in your bucket list?
So I think that there was a point a couple of years ago where I thought about a side hustle, mentoring the women that we've just been talking about.
Yeah. In
some way, helping them get back on their feet. But in the last year, my job has really been consuming and crazy, and I kind of backburnered it. So there's that idea. I also am interested in encouraging women to pursue STEM careers.
Absolutely.
Because I see, like, fields like construction management, which few people know about, but, like, it's exciting. We're restoring the base of the Statue of Liberty. Like, we have cool projects.
It's very cool.
Yeah. And construction management is a career that's great for women because you don't have to lift anything heavier than a laptop. Like, it's
there
not
you
like
go.
a construction worker. So that, and I imagine there's a lot of careers out there in engineering and architecture, other STEM fields. So that's one thing. And construction is an industry that is dying because all the young people, I know this is an overgeneralization, but a lot of young people want to go into IT and tech. And
so there's a need. There's a need for more people, and definitely women.
Need, and definitely women. So that's an idea. And also, I think about owning or working at an art gallery, or being a docent at the Grounds for Sculpture, which is a local world-class sculpture garden. I love art. A perk of being single is that you get to decorate your dwelling any way you want. So
you have a lot of art that's very personal.
I have a lot. Yes, and my art makes me happy, and I live in a very vibrant art community. And my home is a mid-century home with a lot of white wall space, and I have filled it up with art. So I wouldn't mind. My youngest daughter is an interior designer, and I'm like, how do you work with your clients on picking art for their places?
You go.
So
I'm sensing maybe yet another chapter in your book of many chapters. Well, Nancy, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us today, especially your advice to women. And I think you're such an inspiration. I know you're an inspiration to me, and I think you're such an inspiration to our listeners, because so many people have gone through a lot of the things that you've experienced. And it's just great to hear that you've come out on the other side, and that you're happy and successful, and you're thriving. So thank you so much. It was great talking to you.
Thank you, Amanda. It was great talking to you too. I really enjoyed catching up, and you're an inspiration as well.
Thanks so much for joining us today. This show has been a production of Stage Might Communications. It is researched, written, hosted, produced, and edited by me, Amanda Lamb. The music for this show was composed and played by Reginald Griffin. The opinions of my guests are their own. If you have any ideas for the show, please reach out to me on Facebook at Stage Might. Thanks for listening.